Hello, my name is Stephen Redman. Welcome to Pastor's Library, the channel where we discuss everything to do with theology books, especially those that might be on a reading list for a seminary course or a bachelor's or master's degree in biblical studies or theology. Today we're going to talk about a particular author, but if you like what we have to say, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Please make sure you subscribe and click on the bell. That way you will know when we release another episode, and subscribing will help the channel. But none of it costs you anything, so we would appreciate your continued support. So today we're going to talk about Carmen Joy Imes, which I hope I've pronounced right. Carmen seems to me to be a real up-and-coming superstar of the theology book writing game. She's well qualified, got a great position at a US university, and she really has done some particularly strong work. Her first book is Bearing Yahweh's Name at Sinai, which is subtitled A Re-Examination of the Name Command of the Decalogue. So this is the command that we all grew up with: you shall not take the Lord's name in vain, which she abbreviates to NC, the name command. And this is really a tremendous in-depth review to determine what we should understand by this command. The book was written in 2018, it's 227 pages, but this book was originally a thesis which has been remodelled slightly for publication. I have to say to you, this is the sort of book that particularly I like to read. It reads like a thesis. I was going to say it reads a bit like a long journal article, but it really does read like a thesis, and it's excellent. It speaks academically, it's technical, it's dealing with a lot of Hebrew, and I would still say is accessible for anyone that doesn't read Hebrew, because I don't read Hebrew, which if that shocks you, well, there you go. But this is really well written. It seems to me to deal with everything that needed dealing with. And whereas it comes to a conclusion, it isn't a sort of set in stone conclusion. It's really there to sort of say there is yet more research to be done. It's got 23 pages of bibliography, which is very good reading. I love it when I can sit there and flick through a big bibliography and find something that also piques my interest. And I always say that I don't think a book's very good if at least the bibliography hasn't made me buy something. So it's an in-depth discussion of the command as shown in Exodus 20 verse 7 and Deuteronomy 5:11. And she talks about various points. For example, she talks about whether this is intended to be actually ambiguous or whether it's an intentionally broad statement, which I really like that sentence. It made me think hard, and the next chapter was very helpful. Is this about taking an oath, or is it about casual profanity of the Lord's name? Is it a malicious oath, or is it swearing by a false god? Is magic involved? Is cursing involved? There are so many things that she goes through and examines analytically. But seriously, I felt that this was an excellent item to review. And whereas this is not the book that most people will find of hers, if you have an academic bent, I would suggest to you it's a very good read. So that was the first book that she had published, to the best of my knowledge. The second book, which was 2019, so a year after the last one, is 225 pages. This is a totally different pitch. This is aimed at someone in the church pew, maybe someone in a home group, or maybe someone just wanted to study at home a little bit. Besides having a great bibliography and endnotes, There are great discussion questions for the end of each chapter. There are QR codes for 30 videos from the Bible Project and further reading lists at the end of each chapter. And when you hold this in your hand and flick through it, you think, this was written for home groups. And it certainly has that feeling. She treats the law, the Torah, the law, as a gift. And I love the way she talks about it as a gift. I've always taught that the commandments are boundaries, and I've always talked about them as boundaries, but I really liked the idea of gift. I hadn't encountered that before. And what's very interesting is that she talks about the concept of 2 tablets being brought down the mountain and asks us, why do we think there were 2 tablets? There are roughly about 200 words in English describing the Decalogue, and in Hebrew it would have been slightly less, and they would have easily fitted something just a few inches by a few inches. And so potentially she questions why it would need to go on to 2 tablets. We have it in our mind that 5 went on one and 5 went on the other. But what she tells us is that traditionally, when there was a covenant made between 2 nations, there would be 2 copies made, one for one God, one God's temple, and one for another God's temple, so that both gods had a list of the covenant in their temple. And what she says is that Moses still got 2 tablets, but those 2 tablets were for one God, and they were still to stand there in the presence of God. As we know, they ended up in the Ark of the Covenant. But that's because there was one God, and they were submitting their tradition, if you like, to their one God. I thought things like this are really interesting. And I think what comes across is that this is a woman who is really well read and a brilliant Old Testament scholar and tutor. So, bearing God's name, I would recommend that to absolutely anybody in your church. I think it's good, and it's a sort of thing that might be worth doing a series on. Her last book, which was 2023, 231 pages, this is the book that I bought everyone in my family last Christmas, because I just thought this was the one book I really wanted to say to my family, I would take this book out of 2023 and recommend it to all of you. This is called Being God's Image, While Creation Still Matters. This is, again, got a good bibliography. It's got sidebar notes, end notes. It's got discussion questions for each chapter. It's got QR codes leaping around to videos on the Bible Project. It's got further reading lists for the end of each chapter. But what this book does is examines what it means to be human, what the creation narrative means to us. It talks about us being images of God, and that we are images of God to the rest of creation, and that we should find our true identity in being an image of God. For example, she says in her discussions here that sexuality is not necessarily an essential to be a human and have a fulfilled life, but it may be received from God as a gift. And she goes on in that sort of vein. All I would say is, I think for my daughters and my wife, this was the book I chose to give them this year. I always try and find them one each year. And can I suggest to you, it's a great one to give to your family too. A fabulous book, very affordable. It's in the popular range of prices. A very, very good book. Now, the last book I have of hers, and at this moment of time, I think this is the summary of what she's done, although she's got a commentary coming out later in this year, I believe. But this is the first book in the Sacred Roots Spiritual Classics. So it's got a number 1 on the front cover. and it's called Praying the Psalms with Augustine and Friends. Now, this is a collection of prayers inspired by the Psalms. So you have basically got 150 prayers inspired by the Psalms and input from historical people going back as far as Alcuin of York, speaking as an inhabitant of York, who actually went to Alcuin College, the University of York. I'm very aware of Alcuin. It starts with him, it goes on through Augustine, Calvin. In fact, it's got a list of 27 historical Christians, their input to praying through the Psalms. It has loads of ideas for activities. It has a list of who these people were, sort of mini bios of them. It gives a list of when they lived, and it also gives you a section on where can I read more. And then it finishes with something about the series, with this being the first book. Now, I can only say to you, I think this is quite remarkable. 2021, this was published, 369 pages. If you like, this is a very accessible prayer book with a lot of backing for you to understand where the prayers came from. Now, speaking as someone who has never used a prayer book, who has always grown up in a church and ended up leading a church where prayer is always us speaking to God as we warm up, this is very interesting to me, and I found it helpful. There's a specific section on how to jog while praying through the Psalms. Interesting. So, Carmen Joy Imes has basically at this moment in time got 4 books out. The middle 2 are the one about bearing God's name and being God's image. I think those 2 are absolutely outstanding. Both of them ideal for home groups, ideal for you as a pastor or a preacher to develop Sunday morning material from. They're both really excellent. The first book, her thesis remodel for publishing, is a really academic book and really works for me. And this prayer book, if you like, is a very interesting. It's a bit different for me, but I like all 4 of them. But I would say the middle 2, bearing God's name and the being God's image, I would suggest to you, these are books that nobody should miss out on. Everybody should read. They are excellent. And when you see YouTube goes a bit crazy with these days, it's because people have dipped into those books and seen them to be excellent. But if, like me, you're a bit on the academic side and you like those more rigorous books, the book about Sinai is brilliant, and it should at least tell you that the more accessible books are coming from someone who is a true academic who can deliver the goods. I hope that's helped you. If it has, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Remember to subscribe and hit on the bell, and I'll see you next time on Pastor's Library. And until then, bye!